Yoruba. And now we're going to go to the homies and see what they have to say to homies and how their engagement with underdevelopment affected them. So, the guy's profile creeped you out? Yeah. Yeah, right? Exactly that. Nazis don't change their mind. What are we talking about here? All right, I'm going to bring up a couple of good people here. All right. There we go.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
بارك الله بك يا أخي.
Here, I'll put it right there. There we go. Thank you, everybody. Please gift the panel. Do not gift me. Do not do my live goal. I don't care about heart means either. I care mostly about these people like these getting their coins as much as possible. I know that we're not in the best condition, especially with some of us here still off of their medical assistance and shit. After this live, Two Spirit and Chicken Strips are going to do it live. Please support them live and support the pinned video in their profile, Chicken Strips profile, so that way you can help out Two Spirit and them getting. At. We'll be going to East Lacustrian states. We're going to do that one. Rwanda, probably get to that. Amazulu. Hopefully we'll get to that part. And this is Europe and its roots of African underdevelopment. And the coming of imperialism and colonialism. Hopefully we'll hit some of those places. You know? So let's have some fun today. All right, I'm gonna go ahead. Alaikum salam. Go ahead and start. Here we go, everybody. So we're on Dahomey. Ashanti's eastern neighbor beyond the Volta River was Dahomey. Since Dahomey was more deeply involved in the European slave trade, and for as much longer period, its experience shall be cited at a greater length. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Dahomey had a stagnant, if not declining population, and an economy that had virtually no props other than slave exports. What Dahomey succeeded in doing, in spite of all that, is the tribute to the achievement of man inside the African continent. It should be made clear that the groundwork for the socio-political development of IG and Fon people, or Dahomey, was laid down in the period preceding the influence of Europe in West Africa. By the 15th century, Agi states and Aladia and Wadan were already in existence, having a loose connection with the Yoruba and Ife. Dahomey was a offshoot from Aladia in the 16th century, and by the early 18th century, it expanded to incorporate both Aladia and Wudana, and the kings of Alada and Wuda had made the mistake of either failing to protect their own citizens from enslavement, or of actually conniving at their enslavement. Hold on, let me make sure that word's correct. Hold on, that's not the correct word. Conveying. I think it's conniving. Let me make sure. It's really just. Yeah, I was right. Conniving at their enslavement. Dahomey never followed such a policy, which was directly antagonistic to the very maintenance of the state. Instead, Dahomey eventually became the classic raiding state of West Africa after failing to get Europeans to accept any products other than human beings. To achieve that, Dahomey had first to build up tightly organized military states whose monarch came much closer to an authoritarian or despot than did the Alafin or Oyo or the Ashantians or Shanti. Secondly, Dahomey invested a great deal of time and ingenuity on its armies so as to protect its own citizens and wage war abroad. Within European history, the state of Sparta stood out as one that is completely dictated to the art of war. Europeans in Africa in the 18th and 19th centuries invariably referred to Dahomey as the Black Sparta. Throughout the 18th century, the cavalry of Oyo was more than a match for Dahomey's foot soldiers. Dahomey's remained a tribute paying portions of the Oye Empire, but with the fall of Oyo, Dahomey became the supreme military state in that region, and indeed wreaked vengeance on its former. Yoruba overlords' warfare was necessary for securing slaves outside of Dahomey and for obtaining firearms. It was in fact essential for survival. To Dahomey's profound preoccupation with militaristic activities can be illustrated in many ways. Their value system rewarded the brave and the victorious, while ruthlessly despising and even liquidating the cowardly and the unsuccessful on the battlefield. The two chief ministers of the king were the commanders of the quote left and the quote right armies, and other military officers held political appointments. Then too, the artistic media constantly harped upon the theme of war. Beautiful mosaic and paintings appeared on the walls of the palaces of Dahomey, all dealing with military victories. Historical accounts, as rendered by professional reciters, reflected the same bias of the cloth workers, used themselves making emblems, quote, colors and umbrellas for the generals and the regiments. Two unique innovations set Dahomey off from its African neighbors, and even gives it a special claim within the context of feudal and semi-feudal military organization. Firstly, Dahomey encouraged young boys to become apprentices of war. By the age of 11 or 12, a boy could attach to a veteran soldier, helping to carry his supplies and observing battle. The second innovation, and the one that was more widely commented upon, was Dahomey's utilization of its female population within the army. Apparently, the wives in the royal palace started off as a ceremonial guard in the 18th century, and then progressed to become an integral part of Dahomey's lighting machine, and on terms of complete equality and of hardship and reward. Dahomey's population in the 19th century was probably no more than 200,000, and the state consistently managed to send 12 to 15,000 activities on its annual campaign. Of those, it was estimated in 1845 that some 5,000 were women and so-called Amazons of Dahomey, who were feared for their ferocity in battle. Slaving campaigns were costly and not always rewarding in terms of captives. European buyers failed to turn up during certain years, depending on European conditions, i.e. during the American War of Independence, the French Revolution, and the subsequent Revolutionary War. There was a lull of Dahomean slaves exported because far fewer European ships could be spared for the trade in slaves. Without selling captives to get firearms to carry on more warfare for slaves, Dahomey felt its glory and military honor was slipping. Resort to human sacrifice was one attempt to compensate for the diminishing reputation of the state and its monarchs, as was the case with the Oba and of Benin in the 19th century. Nice, you're just reading Decolonial Marxism. Nice. That's great. I'm happy you were. Even so, the story of the reputed savagery, of Dahomey was exaggerated incredibly. The Dahomean state created such refinements as the population census. It conducted diplomacy far and wide with all its niceties and the protocol that one usually hears of only in connection with civilized, quote unquote, European states, and it built up a system of espionage and intelligence as an essential ingredient of its own security. Above all, attention should be focused, at least briefly, on the role of the artist in Dahomean society. Much of African art spring from elaboration of things functional, such as pottery and cloth. However, both religion and the state power also stimulated art. For instance, the brasses and bronzes of Ife were executed on behalf of the religious cults and were associated with the Onai and Ife in the royal family. Indeed, it is a most widespread phenomenon that the feudal ruling class gave its protection to artists along with subsistence and recognition. This is true in Meridian China, with pottery makers and theater artists. It was true of the 16th century Italy, of the Renaissance, and it is true of Dahomey from the 17th to the 19th centuries. No one knows which Dahomeans is to be credited with any given artistic achievement of the independent pre-colonial period. However, in that time particular, individuals were being given the opportunity of self-discovery and self-development, and of serving the society as a whole. Their task was to give pleasure and to capture the hopes and ambitions of the people. In palace wall paintings and throughout and wrought iron sculptures in the stamped patterns of hand-woven cloth designed for royalty, in the intricately carved heads of the safe conduct stuffs of the king's ambassadors, and in the lively tales of how the founder of the Dahomean kingdom came out of the belly of the leopard. And it was art that centered around royalty in noble families, but it was also the national product of a point of identification for the people as a whole. Subsequently, such artistic skills either disappeared or became debased to serve the curiosity of Philistine colonialists. It is still held in some quarters of the Dahomean development. In certain spheres must be credited to slave trading. To demonstrate conclusively that African political and military development through to the 19th century was an extension of groundworks already laid in an earlier epoch, it is best to turn to zones where foreign influence of non-existent was non-existent. The Lacustrian zone of East Africa is one such, and here it is: the the Eastern Lacustrian states. In the earlier discussions, attention is directed to, oh my gosh, here we go, Bunyoro Kantara was as the most advanced social political formation in East Africa up to the 15th century. Its ruling dynasty, the Bakswizi, declined for reasons that are not clear, and they were overwhelmed by new immigrants from the north. While there is some doubt to whether the Bakwizi had an Ethiopian origin, it is clearly established that the 16th century immigrants were Low peoples from the section of the Nile that flows through the Sudan. Following upon Low migration, a new line known as the Bantito dynasty was placed in power over the Bayero proper. Other branches of the same dynasty were enthroned in several places, sometimes breaking off from the main line. As late as the 19th century, the separate Bambito kingdom was carved out in Toro, Toro. Meanwhile, the Bakwizi and the Bahema had staged a comeback in the regions to the south in the form of a clan known as the Bahinda. The Bahinda were one of the pastoralist clans of the old Baniro Katara state, and in the period from the 16th century onward, their stronghold was in Akula and Koringui. Sorry if I'm ruining these words, everybody. Obviously, the new Bambito ruling class immediately sought to take control of the land, but in accordance with settled African customs, they later tried to project themselves as the original owners of the land rather than usurpers. The Basugo were several small Bambeto kings, and researchers reported the following dialogue about land between the members of a royal clan and the commoner. Here it is. Royal clan members, we found this place empty and made something of it. You fellows later came around begging for land, so we were generous and gave you some. Naturally, you're now our slaves. Commoner, Ohoyo, what a lie. We were here long before you. You took our power by trickery. You princes have always been scoundrels. At one stage in the independent history of these interlacustrian states, did land become purely a personal possession to be monopolized by a given class as in the classic European feudal model. Scholars frequently demand these features before they concede that feudalism has arrived, but they fail to take into account the reality of the fact that distribution and use funks or produce. Oh, let me look up this word. Sorry, everybody. I'm not saying it right. U-S-F-R. Usufruct. A right to enjoy the use and advantages of another's property short of the destruction or waste of its substance. Okay, of the land may be in the hands of a few, and they fail to realize that their cattle were a dominant form of wealth. Then, private ownership of herds was also a part of the process by which producers were separated from the means of production. To be specific, those who owned the herds were usually the Bahinda or other Bahuma or the new Bambuto families, while those who tended them were clients and virtually serfs of the owners. As far as land was concerned, the peasants who farmed it paid a heavy tax and corpse to the clan heads and ruling authorities to allow the latter to live without resort to agricultural work. It is necessary to recall that the process of independent evolution on all continents, the increase of productive capacity was accompanied by increasing inequality at all stages, except socialism. To say that the interclustering zones continued to develop uninterruptedly up to the eve of colonialism is to highlight the expanded productive capacity of the states, and at the same time to recognize frankly that it was the result or the increasing exploitation not only of natural resources but also of labor of the majority. The latter were disenfranchised and oppressed to get them to toil in the interest of the few who lived in palaces. The interclustering kingdom fell mainly in what is now Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundia. Only in the northwest of Tanzania are there representatives of the interclustering complex of slates. Northwest Tanzania was the most developed portion of the country in the pre-colonial epoch because of the rest of mainland Tanzania comprised numerous small kingdoms that had not decisively left behind the communal stage. But northeast Tanzania was also the corner of the country in which problems arose when the new ideology of egalitarianism was being preached after the end of the colonial era, because there was already a regime of inequality in the distribution of land and produce and in the rights granted to individuals. In fact, in any meaningful political sense, the area was feudal. There is some disagreements as to the origins of the important interclustering states suit of Bunganda. Some traditions give it the same low origins of Benurio, while others tend to hold that it was Bakwizi's survival. Its social structure certainly paralleled that of Banbito and Banyero closely, contrary to the situation in Akulio or Banganda, or the Bahima did not have the reign of political power. They were only associated with the cattle-owned ruling class, very often in the junior capacity of herdsmen. In any event, the Banganda's history was one of general expansion and consolidation at the expense of Banyero and other neighbors. By the 18th century, it had become the dominant power of the whole region. The Banganda state had sound agriculture base, with bananas as the staple and with cattle products being available. Their craftsmen manufactured backcloth for export, and local production of iron and pots was supplemented by imports from neighboring African communities. Their lack of salt was a big stimulus to the extending of their trade networks to obtain necessary supplies, and as was true of Western Sudan, such an extension of the network of commerce was in effect integrating the productive resources of a large area. Karl Peters, the advance agent of German colonialism of East Africa, remarked that, quote, in estimating the political and commercial affairs of East Africa, too little stress is laid on this internal trade among the tribes. The barrier trade of Buganda, defies all direct calculations. In the Baganda's case, the absence of slave trade must have been important in expanding internal production and trade, and therefore providing a sound base for political superstructure. Hold on a second. What? The host is an Afro pessimist. What? Nice, you're on chapter 7. Sweet. The king of Baganda set up small forces which served as a bodyguard. The rest of the national army was raised when necessary. The political administration was centralized under the Kabaka, and the district rulers were appointed by the Kabaka and his councils, rather than left to be provided by the clans on the hereditary family basis. Great ingenuity went into devising plans for ministering this large kingdom through a network of local officials. Perhaps the best tributes to the political sophistication of Buganda came from the British when they found Buganda and other East African feudalities in the 19th century. They were the best tributes because they were reluctantly extracted from white. Where was I? Yeah. They were the best tributes because they were reluctantly extracted from white racism and culturally ignorant, arrogant colonialists who did not want to admit that Africans were capable of anything. Actually, Europeans were so impressed with what they saw in the Lacustrian zone that they invented the thesis that those political states could not possibly have been the work of Africans and must have been built at an earlier date by white, quote, Hemates. Hold on, let me make sure I'm saying this right. Let's find out what this is from Ethiopia. We're going to find out what this word is. Wait. Oh. Okay, we're gonna find out what this is. Hold on. Come on. I'm gonna spell it to you all. Let me get it. It's HAMITIS, meaning Hamites, a member of a group of North American peoples, including the ancient Egyptians and Berbers, supposedly descended from Ham and son of the. Oh my God! Of course they would do that. Of course they wouldn't give the Africans any type of things. Of course they wouldn't give anybody any type of This myth seemed to get some support from the fact that the Bakwizi were said to have been light-skinned. However, in the first place, had the Bakwizi come from Ethiopia, they would have been black or brown Africans. And secondly, as noted earlier, the culture of East Africa were synthesis of local development plus African contributions from outside the specific localities. They were certainly not foreign imports. Assume that the Bakwizis and the Bahima were from Ethiopia. Then they lost their language and became Bantu speaking like their subjects. The same thing happened to the Bahuto dynasty in the Low extraction, indicated that they had been absorbed by the local culture. Furthermore, the Babuto and the Bahama and the slash Bahenda also forged close connections from the 16th to the 19th centuries, in effect out a different ethnic groups, castes, and classes. A number of nationalities were emerging. The quote-unquote nationality group is held to be that social formation which immediately precedes the nation state, and the definition applies to the peoples of Bagunda, Burioan, Akulo, and Karangui and Toro, as well as to those in Rwanda and Burundi. I can't say these names right, everybody. I am so sorry. Going back a little bit. The question came through and you ignored me? What? What question? Hold on a second. I'll be right back.